Very happy to welcome Jim Riddle to the podcast today. Jim is a well-known name in jazz. He's often called the musician's musician. Jim is based in New York City, and he's had the opportunity to work with some names like Joe Locke, Dave Liebman. Jim also had a 7-year residency at the 55 Bar where he performed his own music. He's released many records, including two recent ones in 2022. He teaches at the New York Jazz Workshop and City College, where he shares his deep knowledge with his students. He has some great stories, and we're thrilled to hear about his incredible career and love for the piano. So, Jim, thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure, Abe. Thank you. My
Good to
pleasure.
see you. Jim, selfishly, as a guitarist, you got to create one of the most unique records I've heard, which is your duo record with the great Pat Martino. So, um, Nexus, I believe the name of it is.
Yeah.
Could you share any fun facts about that record or what it was like, where it was recorded, any fun things we might want to
Sure.
know?
Sure. I mean, the context of it was uh, Pat and I actually did quite a few duet performances together. I started out with him doing quartet, and then, well, within the quartet years, we were doing like occasionally some. He would ask me to join him on some of these like workshop or master classes where I'm an accompanist to him with that. But then I I had left the quartet as far as playing quartet, but then I continued with him in playing duet concerts. So I don't know, for about a solid 6 years or so. And so we had never done there was no record release or record contract for doing a duet recording, which I would have, you know, would have loved to have happened, but it wasn't set up to do that for whatever reasons. That's that. But the good thing is okay. So we had done a number of gigs at the Tin Angel in Philly, which is not necessarily a jet known as a jazz room, but it's uh, they would have jazz concerts occasionally, and so they had Pat and myself in a number of times. Turns out the engineer, happened to record it. We weren't thinking that, but it turns out that he did. And fortunately, some years, so you're just playing gigs, you're not thinking anything. Pat had these cassettes of it, cassettes, I think, or maybe CD, uh, around the year 2000. And then um, it was a number of years later, I was playing a gig at the 55 Bar, and Joe Field's son, Barney, I think his name is Barney, he came in and asked me directly about it, about would it be okay to release that? And it's kind of like, well, it's not necessarily my call, but even though I'm half participant in it. Anyway, I talked to Pat and it all went through. And so uh, that's where that's from, is the Tin Angel. And it's live, and with whatever happened happened, and
A
so
true live recording, and some of the things you were doing as an accompanist were truly some of the coolest things I've ever heard, almost playing the lower notes and mid notes of the piano almost in a percussive sort of way,
yeah.
was that something that kind of evolved naturally, just playing, or did you ever have, was that, these are ideas that maybe Pat liked? I'm kind of curious about that.
uh well, it in essence, Pat was not uh it's interesting for being such a you know kind of waxing philosophical and also theoretical and all kinds of things. If you ever hung out with him, you would know that. But when it came to like playing, he was actually not a whole lot of words. It was like you bring your thing to it and you play. It was a little bit old school. He would of course say some things, but so what I brought to it, he rarely would we have like musical discussions. Oh, I got to play a certain way, and it that was really really rare. And so, fortunately for me, I was kind of bringing just how I naturally felt about playing. I will say this now. My strong one of my strong points, but I'll say is like I'm a rhythmic player. So in a duet setting, I'm not like a killing bass line, I like great organists or just even other pianists that have this really strong, like say if it's straight ahead and they're ding 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 ding. I can do that, but that's really not my thing so much. And so I tended to be more percussive, rhythmic with
No,
that.
that great to hear. I
So,
love hearing
so
about
that's
this
how it
stuff.
worked with Pat, and that was totally cool with him. I was glad to say,
Yeah, that's great. And Jim, I like to think of this music, it's always evolving over time.
yeah.
Young musicians are coming up. Jazz is sort of I like to think of it as a living, breathing art form. And you've done so many performances throughout your career with your group in a variety of settings, being an accompanist like we're talking about. What do you hope people, take away from when they attend one of your performances?
Um, that's a good question. Honestly, I don't I don't think about that. Like, what is the audience like? How are they? Uh, that's not a premeditated thing for me to go. Now I'm going to write this piece of music because I want them to feel this certain way. Well, uh, I'm writing the music with an intention, and certainly if it's a more thoughtful or reflective piece, I'm playing that way, and I don't put anything on the audience that they have to feel this certain way. Now, that's a perspective, an option I have as a musician. Now, if I was more of an entertainer, which I don't feel that I am, some jazz musicians feel they are, but for me, I don't. But I have a great respect for entertainers who like man they're really taking the crowd in. There's a lot of communication, there's participation, all this kind of stuff. Well, I'm more of a concert cat. I think of it that way. So what what I my I figure if I play really well and I'm genuine and I'm 100% in the music and in my performance, I feel that's my part as an artist and also as an exchange with an audience. Because if I'm not playing for an audience, it's not making any sense unless it's a studio recording. So I feel I'm doing my part and I'm cordial, I'm respectful to them, but I'm going to play how I play. And if and if I'm playing like I want to play at a high level and I'm giving 100%, doing my best, then I feel like I've found over the years that's a good exchange with the audience, and I get feedback from them that this was a good thing. So I want them to feel good, but at the same time, it's not a prerequisite. I don't. That's never been a thing for me to go. I got to make this audience feel good, and it's like, well, I don't want them to feel bad. I'll also say I'm not indifferent to how they feel, but at the same time, it's like I go, well, it's like asking them a question. Well, how'd you feel about that?
Well,
you
you play the
because
way it sounds to me like you play for yourself first and foremost, which is I guess the most
yeah.
important thing, what you hear. But audiences can bring a lot of energy to the performance
Oh,
as well.
absolutely. Yeah. Hey,
Has there
man,
ever
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Has there ever been, any unforgettable reactions from any concerts or connections you might have felt that they just stand out like, oh, the audience that night was.
Well, yeah, I mean, man, I'm certainly a feeling human being as we all are. And, man, to have a great audience and a really receptive audience is like, I mean, it's totally fuel for me. And when I experience that, it's like, and of which I do quite often, I'm very grateful and I feel quite blessed and lucky to have so much good response to my music, but just so many people I play with. It's it's a great thing. And well, one thing I'll say, a recent experience is and I you don't always know how things are going to go until you play the gig. But so I just did a tour with the Joe Locke Quartet, and we were in Italy, and we had 6 gigs there, and then we had 2 gigs in England. And so the gig I'm going to talk about is we played at Ronnie Scott's in London, which is
Hmm.
kind of like the village vanguard of Europe. Uh, I've never played there, and so this was a first for me, and it was kind of like a little bit of a bucket list, just like, oh man, this is like, and it's a beautiful club. Anyway, the gig just went great, man, and it was a Tuesday night. It was packed. Joe packed the house, and a fantastic reception from the audience, and a really tons of great feedback, not only about the band, but from some people about my playing, and really great vibes. And it's totally, man, it's a high, and it's still kind of with me. And I go, man, I mean, I wasn't like, oh, everything is focused toward this one gig of the tour. In a sense, it was the highest kind of jazz gig of the tour as far as all the elements.
Yeah,
It's
one time I had a weekend where I just played clubs and did a master class at a university for the music students, and it was just like this the way the flow of everything and the venues just kind of left it leaves you on a high like you're talking about. So I kind of
yeah,
think I understand what you're saying. And that being said, we go on the road as musicians. We do all sorts of gigs. We play them. Sometimes we don't know where we are. And there's a lot of mystery about being a jazz musician,
yeah.
what it's like. Do you think there's a common misconception about this life that, you wish more people understood, or even just younger jazz musicians, they kind of were able to understand?
Well, I mean, the some of the misconceptions that I'm familiar with is probably most common, because I think it continues through. I think there's just in a general sense, not only about jazz music, but about the life of a musician who does it full time, and especially when you travel and you play, especially when you go overseas and you play in Japan, or or wherever. I mean, an overseas gig, Europe is quite often, things like that. Um, it's understandable that people who are not musicians will think that, oh man, that's incredible, and it's like, oh, all the places you get to see, and check, check, check. But a lot of times you're there, but you don't, you don't have enough time to see anything, and sometimes the traveling is grueling. Sometimes you don't feel so well. Sometimes you get sick. All this kind of stuff that's just normal, but that's a misconception. But that's also, it's I have to say that there's a certain amount of innocence with that. It's like, man, I can't hold that to anybody and kind of get pissed about it, because that's unfair, because they don't know. Now, okay, that's one thing. Um, makes enough sense to me that I can be cool with that. I don't want to react funny. Now, the other thing about the music, the misconception about what jazz is, and as the word jazz, it's like, well, okay, these 4 letters are like over 100 years old, and it's going outside of the screen here. It encompasses so much that somebody will hear they're really digging jazz, and you kind of go, wow, that's not the kind of jazz I play, or something like that. And so uh, that gets a little, not tricky, but it can be misconceived that, oh yeah, well, I don't really dig, I don't like this other stuff. So it's kind of hard, I think, as jazz musicians, just to go hard. I don't know. It's just
Well,
you kind of, go ahead. Yeah.
you're talking about the different dichotomies, I suppose, that one person might be thinking about jazz, they might be thinking about all the only jazz they ever heard was, Bitches Brew, and there's a whole other side of like the Bill Evans trio type stuff.
Right. Right. Yeah. And that, there's a funny kind of a funny record of Billy Crystal, the comedian, like from the 80s, I think it was. And I think his daughter, he's talking about his daughter, and she says, "Oh, you mean Paul McCartney was in a group before Wings?" And it's kind of like, oh, the Beatles, it's kind of
Yeah.
just like you're saying, Bill Evans' history before this, but like Miles Davis, this like, wow, it's a completely different way of playing from his amazing two quintets and all this kind of stuff from earlier. So yeah, I mean, so there's that, but I have to say, just another observation of mine, you know, there jazz music, it's not dead, you know. I don't think it'll ever be dead. I don't know that, but I think it's a fringe kind of music, and that's okay. But there's a sustainable part of it. There's, I mean, certainly in Europe, but even in America too, man. There's, you know, if I'm playing a if I'm playing a jazz concert, the people that are there to hear the music. But if I'm playing a gig in Atlantic City now in a casino, which I did for a lot of years and occasionally I do now, the people are really nice, but it's the jazz, it's more of a background thing. It's not a full connection. It's not a concert. They're not paying for that. And that's a different headspace about the music. It's very, very secondary, and that's how it is, and you have to know that. But that's if that's the only kind of gigs you're doing as a jazz musician, you got to break out of that just to know that there are it's hard, but there are dedicated jazz listeners out there all over the world.
Yeah, I mean,
Got to find them, you
I've
know.
kind of felt sometimes that when I've done restaurant gigs and, playing at my, optimal level, you could put, you know, George Benson in this room, and if just based on the room, I don't know if I think the audience might feel, I mean, obvious George Benson, but you know what I mean? Like you could
Oh,
put
of course, of course.
could put
Yeah,
a master in there and they're just tuned out or something.
yeah. It's so therefore the context of what we choose as musicians to perform in, that also is our responsibility. You know,
Mhm.
that's our that I wouldn't say it's solely our responsibility, but it is a decision that we make as jazz musicians. Now, do we want to present our music in a context where people are they not they know what's going on. This is a concert, like they somebody else that they heard, but they're actually paying for it. That also makes a difference for a participating audience member. It's like, man, I'm paying this, and I'm taking 2 hours out of my evening or whatever, and I got this money, and I'm paying. It's a ticket, and if but when we're playing gigs that are and man, I'm nothing against. I've played a ton of restaurant gigs in my life, but it's also and they can be quite nice depending upon the place. But still, the music is secondary to the experience of their evening.
Yes. Almost as if just as if the Giants game is on or something, the music is there and almost the same
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
context or something. That
right.
being said, you said that you played a lot in Atlantic City. I would imagine on, playing in Atlantic City, those types of gigs, you played a lot of standards.
Yeah.
What's a song for you that's timeless, a standard that just never gets old?
First comes to mind is Stella by Starlight.
Yeah,
I
beautiful.
mean, it's a tune I've played uh, many, many times. I don't play it as often just because it doesn't come up as often. Maybe I'm playing a bit more original music and actual arrangements, but Yeah, I mean that's an early tune for me, but it's also I find it to be you know it's so well constructed and great changes and a bit of a challenge in it, even though I'm very comfortable with it. But yeah, God,
I think it's a hard tune personally. I mean,
million
it's one of the
tunes.
first songs you learn. I mean, I think that's was that the tune for you that kind of changed everything and or thought about
Uh,
how you looked at the music, or were there other songs
oh,
before?
I don't know about that. I think it's a bit more comprehensive, probably. Uh, what's in front of me at the time, but I know a lot of tunes, but I don't know a million tunes. I mean, I play a lot of standards, but as far as like, wow, being a real aficionado, I'm a jazz musician. Of course, I play tunes, but yeah, it's a little bit more holistic, I think, by my experiences at the time, learning tunes and what's the environment I'm learning in. I went to the university, but then it was also playing gigs while I was at the university and, on the scene in Denver and then just being a full-time musician. I have to say, in these last, I don't know, 20 some years or maybe longer, I mean, I play a good amount of original music. And so sometimes I'm playing that much more than I'm playing standards. Uh, and then it fluctuates just being a freelance musician. So,
Yeah, and that got me thinking too about, we talked about how there's these different subgenres of the music. But there's
yeah,
also subgenres of the types of jazz musicians there are. There are people who, know maybe 100 songs. There's people who can play any standard in any key, and
yes,
there's people who may not know every single song, but they can improvise in at such a high level. It doesn't matter,
yes,
So.
yes, yeah. And that's the beauty of this art form. And I think that's important to remember for jazz musicians as a community. I feel because if it gets, if you're so locked into like a clicky kind of thing of like, oh man, I'm only hanging with these musicians. It's like, well, man, yes, do that, but we shouldn't negate like somebody, for instance, that just plays it in a more traditional way, but they play great, man. They play great. They have a
Yeah, no, that's
beautiful
that's
sound.
a it's a great no, I'm
Aesthetic.
definitely gonna take that what we're talking about, like I'm gonna keep it up here because it's not something I've able, really articulated with too much. Um
Yeah.
and the relationship with your instrument is such a personal thing, and I'm sure yours is evolving constantly still. And
Yeah.
when was the point for you where you said, I know what I'm gonna do, this is it?
Well, it was pretty early for me.
Hmm.
Not as early as some, but when I was 15, when I had
15.
my first lesson with a jazz musician who was my teacher. This was in North Dakota, and Keith Triquare is his name, and he anecdote, but he just passed away in August. It's like 8 years older than me, but unfortunately he passed away.
Yeah, I'm
But
sorry to hear that.
yeah, but he gave he was a player, but also a teacher in any event. When excuse me, when I heard him play, my father set up the lesson and he said, "Hey, I think if I could ask you for my son to play for you, he's got some talent." And so when I heard him play at the lesson, I go, "That's exactly what I want to do."
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you remember the first concert that you went to that was had that same type of effect, a jazz concert?
Uh, yeah. Good question. Not many jazz concerts in North Dakota. But I had a few records and things like that. But yeah, I think it was more definitive about hearing my teacher. And then I was 15, so a couple years later, I'm thinking about, well, where am I going to go to school? So I went to University of Colorado at Denver, and you know, specifically for jazz, and so it all, I think it all took off in a in the sense of a career from that day and that person and that context, I can say that, and that has not changed over the years, probably never will. But that's unusual. I mean, you know, uh, I didn't think it unusual. I still feel that way. So I'm still about the music, other aspects of life. It's like I kind of go, oh yeah, money. Just it's that's still, a bit of a challenge, even though, I'm sensible. But anyway, that it's the music, and to elaborate when you said I'm probably still evolving, and that's true. One thing I'm finding, um, that, well, I've known this for a while, but I could say it this much: I feel like I get better every year, and I'm 65, and I feel like I'm getting better every year. It's interesting, and I'm very grateful for that. I don't feel like I've plateaued. Sometimes I do, just because but it doesn't last long. It's like, there's, but a couple of factors to elaborate on that is I'm also in a context of being in New York, but also, knowing a lot of musicians that help me rise, that help me up, and they push me, or I'm in other situations where I'm pushing other musicians, which is a good feeling too, where it's like, oh yeah, okay, it's not so conscious, but you get a sense about, like, oh man, this is pushing me, of course, because you have to
No,
practice.
I love to hear you say you're still evolving. I mean, um, because that's one thing about the journey that people forget. It's a journey. You want to, oh, there, when can you stop learning? I mean,
Yeah, right.
never, And
Yeah,
and if anyone thinks they're done learning, then,
yeah.
I don't know. That's
Well, and that's the great thing, Abe, about this art form that we're in. Jazz is just this continuous thing, and it's not, it's not set up, or there's no kind of uh, requirements that you're supposed to stop at a certain time.
yeah, yeah,
Whereas I
absolutely.
think, you know um, and what's interesting too, I mean, for instrumentalists in any field, we have the longest career. I mean, as long as everything is working. But for singers, that's, as they get older, that's a trickier thing. But look, man, for classical singers, they go up to this certain point now in terms of their, like their peak singing careers. At some point, they do stop. They might continue singing, but not as a soloist or as part of the opera, because their voice has lost that thing,
Yeah,
that range.
mhm.
So professionally, they have some things, and for pop stars, I mean, pop singers, that's also another thing. But look at, in jazz, I just read that Sheila Jordan, the singer, she just
Mhm.
turned 96.
Yeah, yeah, and she still sings.
She's still singing. Her voice is not like it was 30 years ago or 50 or 60 years ago, but that whole essence of communicating is a part of the jazz art form that we all accept, and we go, shit, man, thank you, and keep doing it.
I'm grateful because, once I decided I was going to play jazz, when I was maybe, you know, 18 or something, but when I started like to actually play some gigs when I was like in my early 20s, like I still feel the same. I'm feeling I know I'm get better, but I'm like, yeah, I just want to play.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And I think that's the mindset to like that's what keeps people that's what that creates the longevity, or I hope so. Um and Jim, before we wrap up, there was one other thing I wanted to ask you,
yeah.
because some people view success in this industry as having recorded some albums or done some tours or having X number of views or followers. How do you view success at this point in your career?
um well, that it's a good question. I mean, I feel, without a doubt, I could say this as an artist, because that's an important word which has certain ramifications. For me, I feel as a jazz artist, I'm successful, and I have been for many years.
Hmm.
Okay, uh, and I'm really, really grateful about that. And the path that I've taken is like I don't take every gig. I don't. And sometimes I suffer financially from that. But I go, man, I don't want to do this context anymore. That's a one way of putting it. And so, but what that does for me is that I feel like I go, okay, well, I'm closing this door, but also this other door is opening up. And that's more of my view. And as I get older, as I age and mature, I am becoming more refined in a way of what I will do and won't do. What I want to do is I just want to keep getting better, but I need that push not only of inside me to continue to experiment at the piano, but also to play with like musicians who are on the same path and who may know very well know more things than I do, yet we can communicate and make music. That's the most important to me. And if I'm staying on that path, that's a successful path.
No,
Now, if
that's
I'm
beautiful.
based on money, I'm like, wow, I'm way under where I should be. Honestly, but that's never been my MO, man. It's just not. It's about making music. And of course, I get paid well on some gigs, other gigs are just average, blah, blah, blah.
And
But
I'll say this: you look, much younger than the actual number of your age. I mean, by traditional,
uh,
sta-
well,
yeah,
thank you, man.
you look good,
Yeah.
But and I've always admired your playing. I've had the opportunity. One of the, one of my favorite moments was when I saw you play it with your group at the 55 bar when it was existing. I was, privileged to be there, and
uh, Thank you.
and you're always welcome back on the podcast, and
That's
I want to
very
thank
kind.
you so much for your time today.
Well, you're welcome, Abe, and it's nice to reconnect with you. It's been a while, and please say hello to Anthony if you know.
I'm gonna send him the
Oh, Jenny.
podcast when it's finished.
Oh, okay, okay. Yeah, yeah, because I'm in not in touch, but we Facebook and seeing what he's up to. But
Definitely.
that's how I met you. I think is
Yep.
Anthony. Yeah. Thank you, man. My
Thank you.
pleasure. And I wish you the best with everything.
Thank you.